Sharon saved her supply chain from cyber risk and ended the office goat debate.
Now, the Republican vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, is accusing Apple of benefiting from slave labor in China, something the company's previously denied. Comes as the U.S. is trying to move away from reliance on imports from China. We have the supply chain expert, Brandon Daniels, joining us, the CEO of the firm Exiger, which deals in supply chain issues. What about this? I know, it's a legit issue, right? And you've said that a lot of companies unknowingly use Chinese slave labor. Explain.
Well, thank you for having me on, Connell. It's good to see you again. What we've seen over the last 2 years is that we've peeled the veil back on supply chains, and we're starting to find a lot of significant issues in some of our most pervasive supply chains. So one stat that I think is gives you some insight into this. Over the last 2 years, Connell, the CBP has seized over $3.5 billion of goods coming from different countries, largely sourced out of Asia, Vietnam, China. They've seized over $3.5 billion of goods, and over $3 billion of what's been seized for Uyghur forced labor issues being connected with slave labor, essentially. Over 3 billion of that 3.5 billion is related to electronics. So this is an issue that is still pervasive. It's an issue that specifically does impact the electronics industry substantially.
I want to ask you what we should do about it, how we can clean this up. But first, both sides, J.D. Vance, I mentioned, here's what the Republican nominee for vice president had to say on TV. Watch.
I think Apple's an evil company. No. Do I think that sometimes they benefit from Chinese slave labor? Yeah, and that's pretty sick. And I think that a company that wants to benefit from American markets should also have to pay American workers a fair wage.
And then, to get the response from the White House, the president's press secretary, we just heard from on another issue, said this about China.
The president, back in May, when he was announcing that he was going to take action, he said very clearly he was going to do that to protect Americans. The last administration, their trade deal with China failed to boost American manufacturing.
Okay, Brandon, as I said, the question for you, with your expertise, is what do we do about all of this? How do we clean it up?
Well, Connell, still less than 30% of the major manufacturing OEMs, companies in the United States have visibility below their first tier. So they only know who they're buying the core product from, right? Well, the second you go beneath the core product, let's say a smartphone, you're into the company that actually manufactures the lithium-ion battery. You may know who that company is. But then when you get down into the subparts, the cathode that actually helps you to run the battery, that's going to have components of nickel and cobalt and lithium in it. Well, in many cases, that cobalt could be actually coming from Chinese-owned mines in the Congo that are, using slave labor. In many cases, in alternative energy, as an example, in many cases, the solar panels that being manufactured are coming from China and are allegedly connected with slave labor. And so the first thing that we need to do to solve this problem is map our supply chains. And that's what we've been helping our customers to do, to go all the way from the product all the way to the hole in the ground. Right. The second thing that we need to be able to do is we then need to take those map supply chains, and we need to be able to assess them for risk. Where do we have high risk regions or high risk products where slave labor is a part of the potential supply chain? And then we have to look for alternatives, which is the hardest problem, Connell. It's what in both of those clips people were talking about. Right. How do you move these manufacturing lines to allies of the United States, to places that have clear reporting on how what their labor standards are, moving it to U.S. manufacturing, right?
Because you have a lot of issues there with cost and natural resources and all the rest. So problem, yes. Right. Solution might be tough to come by. Great explanation, though, on it all, on an important issue. Thank you, Brandon. Good to see you again. Brandon Daniels.